How's it going, everybody? This is Coughlin, and welcome back to the Barely There podcast. We are back to cover everything surrounding your Chicago Bears. As always, I'm joined by the Swami of Salami, the Ayatollah of Capicola, Lucas Perfetti. Lucas, explain to the folks at home how you're doing on this fine evening.
I am doing fantastic. Can't complain at all, to be honest. We got college football starting here, and fantasy draft season. It's all here. We're here next week, so it's the best time of year, man. You know what I mean? Get your fucking sweatshirt on, get your hoodie, get you some apple cider, or maybe some chocolate milk or hot cocoa, whatever you like. Drop a couple marshmallows in it and get ready for football.
Apple cider? Listen, man, I can do with the chalky milk or some shit, but like apple cider, like let's not. Anyone who wears UGG boots and like yoga pants during the fall, please don't listen to what my friend Lucas just said, because please, I don't want that to be a thing.
I just made it up, so it's a thing now. I mean, I'm gonna just say it now on every single episode.
Pumpkin spice perfetti, unbelievable. Yeah, so I will be inside Camp Randall this Saturday for the Wisconsin Badgers home opener. I'm gonna be up in the box for the first time. That's actually pretty dope. Probably going to be sweating my balls off because it's supposed to be unseasonably hot, because of course it's supposed to be unseasonably hot. But I'm with you, Lucas. Like, we are officially in the season of waking up early on a Saturday or Sunday, going grabbing a box of donuts, having a sweatshirt on, getting a little bit of a breeze with some leaves flying around, hopefully getting something started on the grill and enjoying a full day of football. Like, I can't wait. I cannot wait to carry my TV down to the living room and be a complete degenerate jag off Saturdays and Sundays moving forward. But anyway, we have quite a bit to cover in this episode. Before we jump into it, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else to get your podcasts. Also, be sure to follow us at Barely There Pod on Twitter to stay up to date with everything related to the show and the Chicago Bears. So we finally have our 53-man roster, Lucas. The Chicago Bears finalized it. I mean, they've been tinkering with it, I guess, the last couple days, but they kind of finalized it, I believe, 2 days ago. But what is nice is we are currently looking at a roster that is fairly healthy. I mean, we're going to talk about some of the exceptions to that moving forward, but overall, first thoughts, what you're looking at as far as the 53-man roster and maybe some surprises. What do you think of the final roster heading into week one?
So it's funny because I feel like this may get me to spiral, but we're buffering here, it says. Buffering. RX Gaming. Or I think that's J Billis Games. Either way, I don't know. Check our private message too. But
oh yeah, no, I'm looking at it. It might just be Twitter.
Okay. Elon's fucking us. But yeah, either way, I think the story really is Badgett, right? Special Agent Badgett. I think that's kind of the most significant thing on the 53-man roster. Obviously, Kindle Vildor, Travis Gibson, right? Those are some cuts that maybe you could have anticipated a little bit, but not necessarily were expecting. At least Travis Gibson, a lot of people got upset about, who wasn't even claimed on waivers. But I think like Badgett is such a significant story, right? A kid that comes from D2, not recruited, kind of like, I hate to say it because I don't want to feed into the narrative of like people are already calling for Badgett. You know what I mean? But like he gives you Tom Brady vibes in that sense, where it's like counted out for most of his life, most of his career, came in, showed what the fuck was up, and earned the QB2 spot. And I mean, we're talking about over PJ Walker. PJ Walker is someone that got $2 million. He has played, had experience in the league. And really the only way he was going to do that was by being awful. And that's exactly what happened. He was fucking terrible. So Badgett came in and really just played well throughout the preseason. I know I don't want to buy too much into the hype, right? Like, because he's a D2 kid that is, has to make an elevation, no real game time, but like in the preseason, he had a quick release, dude. And I mean, like, he made a couple bad decisions that you would chalk up to rookie mistakes, but I just thought he was very impressive, and it's nice that they gave him the spot, right? Like they could have said, "Oh, we paid PJ Walker his $2 million," and and tried to sneak him onto the practice squad or something like that. But they saw him with enough value to roster him. I mean, he made the 53-man roster as a D2 walk on. That's kind of fucking unheard of, right? Like that's I'm sure there's maybe one or two other guys that have done that, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's the only one that has ever walked on from D2 straight into a 53-man roster. You know, just good for him. That's cool. I know a lot of people are upset that he fucking was an Aaron Rodgers fan or whatever, but it's like, bro, anyone that is entering the league right now that watch football, Aaron Rodgers was no doubt the most talented quarterback for like a 10-year fucking period. So that's with Brady and Manning and all them involved too, right? Like maybe Brady and Manning were better leaders, but Rodgers in terms of pure what the fuck he could do with the ball, I mean, insane, right? Like so I don't know. That's my initial impression. I'm happy for the kid. I'm glad, and it's nice to see from the organization that they're like. I feel like it's a double edged sword because it's nice that the organization will cut someone like PJ Walker for not performing, even though they gave him a little bit of guaranteed money, right? But also kind of like Leatherwood gets cut, PJ Walker gets cut. That shit could add up if it's down the line and things are tight and your quarterback's paid and shit like that. There's just been some of the lower tier signings that we saw that would excel for Ryan Pace. Just do not pan out for Ryan Poles. There's a pretty long list right now of the Michael Schofields and the Lucas Patricks and those lower tier signings. I apologize. I was trying to buy you some time to get things fixed. I'm sorry.
Everything's good. Our boy Black Ram Gaming was fucking with us, so we're all good. We just hit panic mode. But anyway, just kind of touch on a couple different things here. Tyson Bagent, I think my favorite thing about this entire situation, like, dude, I don't care about the whole Aaron Rodgers thing. That's dumb. If people are gonna get upset about that, like I dare you to ask your favorite player who their favorite player growing up was. I mean, how many Green Bay Packers do you think had to deal with the fact that how many Packer fans do you think had to deal with the fact that one of their favorite player was Walter Payton? Because I guarantee you there was probably a lot of them. And that's fine. Most linebackers growing up, dude, they were probably a fan of Brian Urlacher or some of the old school ones. They were fans of Dick Butkus or, Mike Singletary. Like it just is what it is, man. You enjoy a great football player. I hate Aaron Rodgers with every bit of my being, but like, I understand why people like him as far as like the talent wise. And if you're a young quarterback, why you should want to replicate that. Now that that's all out of the way, though, I do want to say just, outside of what Bagent did on the field, because I thought he had a pretty good preseason. He looks like someone who's very confident in his ability. And obviously he showed up with a guy that genuinely had nothing to lose. And those are my favorite types of guys to have as your backups or have in the room on a 53-man roster, because like it's all up. There's no down from here. You know what I mean? There's no like massive downfall. If Tyson Bagent doesn't make it, he's still had a hell of a college career and he still has a degree, I believe, to go back to. You know what I mean? So like he's literally just playing with house money, and that's what you like to see out of guys like that. Also, on the flip side of that, and I have to give Ryan Poles a lot of credit for this, we finally brought in a young quarterback and gave him a legitimate shot to compete for a backup spot. And I can't really remember the last time we did that, Lucas. As far as a guy that was either undrafted or someone who came out of the draft, it's constantly been okay, so we're going to sign a Chase Daniel, or we're going to sign a Brian Greasy, or we're going to sign, Mark Sanchez, or we're going to sign any list of backup quarterbacks, you know what I mean, who are established. And it's always good to have an established backup quarterback. I get that. But like, we have just been in development hell outside of who we draft in the first round to be our next quarterback for the long term. It's something that annoyed me when Jay Cutler was in town. We refused to acknowledge the backup quarterback position outside of signing guys like a Josh McCown. It annoyed me during the Trubisky era that we basically just kind of handed him Chase Daniel, Mark Sanchez, and any other guy we could basically pick up off the street. No offense to Chase Daniel, you made a lot of money during your career, buddy. Congratulations. But like, we never took somebody coming out of the college game and gave them a chance to win a backup job. And we finally did that with Tyson Bagent. And that's my favorite part of that entire situation. We finally had a young kid that we could possibly develop to be a good backup quarterback. And, if Fields, a guy that we need, if Fields goes down, to really kind of hold it down. And you want to know what? If he shows value in those games, you can trade him into a team that's kind of quarterback hungry. You know what I mean? There's only
100%.
positives to developing young quarterbacks under your star quarterback. I mean, look at how Washington handled Kirk Cousins and RG3. You know, obviously Kirk Cousins is a little bit more highly touted of a guy, but that was someone that they just put in the freaking slow cooker and were like, well, if we need him, we'll get him. We'll toss him in the game. And when they tossed him in the game, he had a couple good games. Obviously, he ended up taking over that job in Washington. But regardless, having that development cycle, you know, the Kevin Cobbs of the world. Look at the return the Eagles got for Kevin Cobb after he started, what, 6 games for him?
Andy Reid's famous for it, you know?
And that's just what good teams do. As far as like the Travis Gibson situation, it felt like even going into camp that he wasn't going to get a real shot, especially with how much we kind of addressed the defensive end position in the offseason, which I don't think is right. I think Travis, you know how big of a Travis Gibson fan I am. You know, I think he's someone who deserved a shot, deserved a real look. And it just felt like, especially after that first depth chart, we kind of asked each other, like, is this going to be, them challenging him? Is this, or is this legitimately where they see him? And it kind of seems like that's it. It wasn't anything personal. They just apparently did not see a spot for him on this roster, going in. And that's a hard thing to battle. It doesn't matter how well you play. And you want to know what? I hope Travis Gibson makes it with the Titans. I hope he gets a legitimate chance to start. I hope he gets a legitimate chance to show what he is as a pass rusher, because I think he can be a great pass rusher, whether it's situational or, on a second, third down basis.
He's with the Titans now.
Yeah, but I also think it's crazy that we were just drowning for pass rushing help last year. And, it's great that we signed Ngakoue, but like now that's the wrong position group. I feel like that you subtract from, but maybe Travis wasn't willing to do that rotational thing. Maybe he wasn't willing to be that guy off the bench. Maybe he wanted that starting role. We don't know. It's obvious that he came out and said that he never demanded a trade, but he could have also said like, hey, if you guys aren't going to start me, let me loose and go find a team where I can at least try to compete for that job. And I mean, when you look at what Tennessee has on their edges, it's kind of bare, outside of like some like guys on the inside that they have, which the interior of their defense is actually pretty impressive, but they have just never had that elite pass rusher in years. And hopefully Travis gets a real shot. I hope nothing but good stuff for that guy. Genuinely.
Yeah. And he ended up going unclaimed, whereas Vildor did get claimed by the Titans, which was a little bit more surprising because they both were on that CBA kick-in where like the incentive, it kicks your contract up from a mid-round contract to like $2 million or something like that. So claiming him, they must have had a really high value for Kindle Vildor. But just in general, right? Like after, we were the first waiver claim as well. We made those 2 claims and we made that trade for Feeney or whatever, right? Dan Feeney, the backup center, which a lot of people don't like. I truly don't give a fuck about 6-rounders at all. Like you can find starting players on day 3, like in round 4, round 5, especially if you're looking at interior linemen, those types of players. Round 6 and 7, the drop off is so insane. I literally don't care if the Bears trade every single one of their fucking 6th and 7th round picks for the duration of their history, right? Like I don't think those rounds have much value. So I'm not going to get bent out of shape for it, but just to kind of see how even behind Ngakoue, like there's really not a ton there. And it's one thing that Gibson got cut because his incentive was kicking in. He's not a part of the future plans. They don't see him as a system fit, whatever. He had a good preseason, right? But you bring in Terrell Lewis to then cut him for some dude on the Colts. I'm blanking on his name right now, but you know what I mean? Like that, to me, that's, while you send a great message with Bagent, I mean, you know what? It sends a good message either way. I'm not going to sit here and try to play devil's advocate because it pretty much says, like, if you're not fucking good enough at the bottom of the roster, like, you better always be constantly working for your job or we'll find someone else to come in and take it. And then I think Bagent sends the message that if you are good enough, if you are in your fucking spot, we'll give it to you. Right? So, it's kind of one of those things where you lose a couple fan favorites. I mean, dude, Terrell Lewis and Travis Gibson were the only guys that produced as defensive ends in the preseason. Like that Rasheem Green guy they brought in, I don't understand why he doesn't get dropped over Lewis. So there's just, at the end of the day, we're talking about the 53rd fucking man on the roster. So it's not that huge of a deal. And I do think it's actually really encouraging to see that we only made 2 claims this year from 7 last year down to 2. So it pretty much says like, hey, I feel like I'm in a lot more comfortable of a spot where only those last 2 spots needed to be turned over, that we felt it was worthwhile. So,
Yeah. I mean, you kind of look at the waiver thing, especially, because obviously one of the big names who had gotten released was from the waiver wire last year in Alex Leatherwood. But it kind of makes me, and not to kind of divulge here, but it kind of makes me think that it's similar to how some college football transfer portal situations work, especially with the way the transfer portal has opened up. You see first year head coaches this past year, like a Luke Fickle or like, other guys around the nation who have gotten their first guy or gotten their first gig. They're going to use the transfer portal this year. They're going to use that to get some guys in the building because they're obviously trying to push out some of the people from the old regimen and kind of bringing guys that they want to bring in. And, at least you're at the point where the roster is probably not too deep. So you're going to take shots on some of those guys. But I guarantee you, as guys like, Fickle in year 2, in year 3 moving forward, I guarantee you the transfer portal is going to dry up a lot more. Not because guys aren't going to be willing to transfer to Wisconsin per se, but because he's going to have his guys recruited. He's going to have his guys brought in. And it kind of feels like, looking back on it now, that's kind of what Ryan Poles was doing. He was trying to push out those pace guys. And, think about that as you will. You know what I mean? Sometimes GMs, when they get a position of power, they want their guys in the building, and you use the term double-edged sword a lot, Lucas. I feel like that's one of those situations where, like, yes, you hate to see guys like this go, but at the same time, we have to give this guy a chance to bring in the guys that he wants to do to bring in a culture that he sees fit, and it looks like that's kind of what Poles ended up doing. I do think there are situations with like Alex Leatherwood where you can look back on the contract that we took on to claim him, especially considering the report at the time that nobody else had put in a claim on him. And, they were kind of going to let that contract eat. While I like the aggressiveness of something like that, taking a chance on a former first round pick who was obviously overdrafted, but, had shown some talent in Alabama, I'm hoping this is a lesson for Ryan Poles to not put in, go for the hot waiver claim every single year, just based on the fact that somebody showed some potential in college. Because, at the end of the day, if you've played a season or 2 in the NFL and you were a highly touted draft pick and you haven't shown any glimpse of that in the NFL, the body of water might be a little too big for that guy. He might be a minnow in an ocean compared to being a minnow in a koi pond. You know what I mean? And it kind of feels like that's what happened with Alex Leatherwood. This is a guy that, should have been able to just jump right into Tevin Jenkins' position as he's jumping on the IR. Instead, he was cut in a situation where we really needed a guard. I think that says a lot about where Alex Leatherwood is.
Traded for a different one, yeah.
And the type of impression that he had put on the franchise. I would be shocked if another team took a chance on Alex Leatherwood on a 53-man roster. I could see practice squad, but outside of that, with just the 2 stops that we've taken on a team that was starving for a guard to step up right now, not a good look. Not a good look for Alex Leatherwood.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely not for him. I do think he definitely learned something from it, but I don't hate the process of that move too much, like the Leatherwood pickup, because with what Poles had to work with last year in terms of salary cap and with what we had on the roster, I thought it was a creative way, right? It does suck. In hindsight, it's like, yeah, it's a shitty move. But the process itself, like, it was a creative way to try to bring in some kind of talent with what he had operatable, right? And like, it's better that he didn't compound that mistake and try to sneak someone like Jatir Carter onto the practice squad when really he earned that spot, right? Because a lot of it is sending messages when you're a GM. Like if you're gonna, even someone like, Nate Davis gets 1 year. After that, it's like you got 1 year left guaranteed on your deal. If you're not producing the way they want, like, you have to send those messages to let everyone know, like, this is a motherfucking business and we are trying to win games. We are in the business of winning games. And if you're not interested in that, like, we'll figure it out without you, right? So you can't just keep eating contracts like the Leatherwood one or the PJ Walker one or any, I say that about Davis. I really like the signing. So I just used it as an example, right? As someone that just got paid and a pretty good amount, But at the end of the day, I do think he has kind of instilled that with the way he's operated in a sense, right? Like even going back to the crying in a car with Larry O, right? Like it was the right move after he didn't pass that physical. It
Yeah.
sucked. It was stupid, but he like Ace would compound mistakes, right? He fucked up Andy Dalton because the Nick Foles thing didn't work out, or vice versa, right? Like the compounding mistakes is what really kills you. Whereas like Poles seems like he's pretty good at letting go, just being like, you know what, let's cut that bait before it gets worse. Like I got a bad feeling about it. Now it could bite him in the long run too. Someone like Travis Gibson could go out there and have 8 sacks for the fucking Titans while we're struggling to get sacks, right? It could bite you, but I do think for the process, it's a bad move in hindsight, but the process wasn't that terrible. I don't mind the lower tier shots like that because they're not going to hurt you as bad in the long run. Like I said, if it gets closer to you paid Justin Fields and Darnell Mooney's on another contract or something like that, you have something on the horizon, one of these DTs explodes and you're going to have to pay them, then those moves matter a lot more. But for right now and where the Bears were last year to where they're at this year, I don't. I understand the process. I don't mind the shots.
Yeah, and if I can give Poles credit, I would have to say that, and he's even shown this with what he said in the media in interviews this past these past few months is, it seems like that first year really was a learning experience for him. He did learn a lot. I think I think any new GM, they kind of, especially a guy who hasn't done it before, they kind of get stuck into this little shell, like they want to win the offseason, or they want to win the waiver wire. You know what I mean? They want to be able to win at things they can control in the short term. Whereas when you try to win something like that, the long term suffers. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's, I like that you brought up pace and compounding the problem, because I feel like he was kind of like somebody who gets in a car accident, for example, and they turned left when they got in that car accident, and now when they drive, instead of just maybe slowly turning left, maybe slowly easing into it, you just stop throwing left and you just start turning right all the time. You know what I mean? You're overcorrecting an issue instead of, okay, so this is an issue. Maybe this is something I ease into with the next move that I make. Maybe I kind of learn from this and, ease into going left, instead of, I'm just never going to turn left again. I'm going to turn right and take my chances that way. You know what I mean? I like the idea that Poles is learning, a little bit on the apologize if we were shooting. Okay. Yeah. Looks
Did
like
you
we lost.
freeze? Okay, because I was just staring at the camera and I didn't want to like start talking. And
Nope. Nope. We lost connection there for a minute.
okay,
I think we should be good. I apologize for that, guys. But really, to kind of encapsulate my point, it's nice that Ryan Poles is kind of learning from mistakes of the past, and he's kind of growing as a GM, because I think that's very important to the long-term success of this team. And being able to realize, like, hey, I got a little snake bitten the last time I got over aggressive on something like this. Maybe we try to develop a guy at this position instead of going out and trying to throw money at a problem, because it did seem like, and I wasn't a guy who hated Ryan Pace or anything like that as much as a lot of other people do, but like that was one thing that was kind of almost ended up being his downfall. He tried overcompensating, and hopefully that's something Poles doesn't do.
yeah, and I think like, oh, Derek, you're gonna have to tune in next week for that. No week 1 predictions. We'll probably give you season predictions today. But Ryan Pace, a lot of people will talk about him like he's this fucking worst GM ever, blah, blah, all that, right? The reality is he went all in too early. Like, and when you go all in, there's only one option. You have to be good for a while. The reality is the base was built the right way, and that Khalil Mack offseason like fucked our books up, and it really kind of forced him to compound mistakes. But this isn't a Ryan Pace podcast. I do think he he got a way worse name than he did. I mean, Atlanta's going to be pretty fucking good, and he's pulling the strings over there. But overall, I do think it's nice. It's a nice change of pace to have Ryan Poles and just be a little bit more conservative with how you're going to try to take some of those risks, a little bit more calculated. And like we haven't really seen him pressed against the cap yet. And we don't know. Kansas City doesn't necessarily operate pressed against the cap. They're pretty good at filtering in young new talent, and Poles seems to be very good at drafting. I'll give him that. Like these year two players like Gordon Brisker before he got a little banged up, they look ready to fucking pop. They look very, very good. So
well,
I'm excited
for
that aspect.
Yeah, well, I mean, dude, and even look at like the way Kansas City operates. You look at the offseason situation, I believe it was last offseason with Tyreek Hill. Dude, a lesser man in that situation hands Tyreek Hill whatever he wants. Because they're like, there's no way I can break up Patrick Mahomes and his number one receiver. They did it, and then they went and won a Super Bowl. Like it's crazy when you look at it like that, but it is something that if you can do it well and you can replicate, and it's almost like running analytics like they do in the movie Moneyball, man. It's not replacing Tyreek Hill with one player. It's replacing Tyreek Hill with like three. You know what I mean? And that's the way the Chiefs operate. And that's kind of the way they operate on the defense side of the football, because when they do spend money on offense, specifically that huge Patrick Mahomes contract, Travis Kelce, those are two like needs on that offense. You look over at the defensive side of the football, and yeah, there's a lot of moving parts. They keep young talent in there. That's where they spend a lot of their draft capital for anyone who really pays attention. They might spend like one higher pick on an offensive player to give Pat another weapon. But outside of that, it's a lot of defense. It's the Leo Chanels of the world. It is, the front end guys. It is keeping rotating parts in there. So like if you have a defensive player that is just popping off, that needs to get paid, that is going to, the market demands that he's going to get paid. And that's kind of why they're running in the Chris Jones situation right now. And I'm really interested to see how that plays out, because obviously we're a name that's
a pretty big staple though. That's a tough one not to work out.
But that's kind of what we thought with Tyreek Hill. We thought that he was kind of
Matthew too, right? Like Matthew was a huge loss.
Yeah, but they just kind of funneled parts in and they drafted well. And like that's why seeing Poles draft as well as he does, at least so far that we've seen, is very promising, because if we have to hit tough situations like that, hopefully we can bring guys in that can kind of help not replicate that success, or bring enough guys that can help replicate that, and I'm hoping that, and we don't know how he deals with his contracts yet. We genuinely have not seen any outside of the Komet extension, but honestly, even before Poles got here, that Komet extension was already kind of starting to become a discussion if he had a good year, and he did, you know what I mean? That was kind of forced on him, but like we have not seen how he handles extensions or contracts with his own guys. So that's going to be interesting to see moving forward, because Kansas City has built a really good model of success. And that's, everyone always points at like Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce. The roster building over there outside of that is very, very, very good. And, when Poles was hired, that was one thing we thought or hoped that he would bring over. And hopefully we're starting to see the beginning of that.
Yeah. And I'm not going to take anything away from Kansas City's front office, because they were trending in that direction with Alex Smith, right? But right now, their current situation, having Patrick Mahomes he's at the status of where Tom Brady was, right? Like you can rotate in guys like Wes Welker or Julian Edelman, or just give him one solid piece like Gronk, and everything else can kind of change around it. He'll find his one guy that he needs, right? Like, or his two guys that he's going to be able to depend on when it's time to win. So they do have because it follows the model of don't pay running backs. Running backs don't matter. Right, only pay your offensive linemen and your pass catchers and your quarterback, right? Like that's the whole. But they have the luxury of doing that. There's a lot of different ways to team build, and right now they're in easy mode where they just have to make sure that they hit on enough of their picks to surround that, to just put enough guys around, because they're going to be in contention every single year, right? So I just wanted to state that while we were talking about the GM aspect, but it also kind of brings us into, or me at least, into that Josh Lucas interview, because that was a hot topic. Josh Lucas was on Hojan Johns, and he used to work for Pace and, during the Nagy era and everything. And he pretty much just said, like, seeing what the coaching staff was able to do and kind of drop their habits and just build the offense around Fields is extremely encouraging because, and then he pretty much alluded to the fact that Nagy was a complete fucking shitbag, right? So
it's something me and you knew from the start. So like,
it's nice to hear a scout though be like, yeah, no, this guy fucking sucked. Like, I'm sure there were internal discussions in that war room of like Pace like defending him or something, or maybe Pace didn't like him and McCaskey wouldn't let him fire him, or who knows what the situation is, right? But I'm sure there was some heated discussions about him because he looked like he fucking hated Matt Nagy throughout that entire interview. Excuse me. But yeah, it's just nice and encouraging to see that like our coaching staff as well, when we're talking long term, they're willing to kind of filter in, at least on the offensive side, right? Defensive side, it seems like they kind of want their specific, hey, this guy plays in a 4-3, but offensively, it's almost like they're a little bit more fluid in terms of adjusting, being willing to, and that's what you need to do, right? That's what you need to do. And it gives your GM a lot of flexibility as well. Because if he's trying to ultimately fill Tyreek Hill with a 1-to-1 Tyreek Hill, it's going to make it very fucking difficult for him to do so, right? So it's a good working relationship in general.
Well, and even to a point you just made about the defense, I'm sure I've quoted this before on this show at some point, but I just want to bring it up again because I always thought it was very interesting. Whenever you hear some like a defensive player in an interview, and this is across the entire NFL, it doesn't matter if these guys are NFL players. If you ask a defensive player, high level, mid level, low level, you ask them what the biggest hurdle of going to a new team is. There's a lot of different answers you probably think you're going to get, but one of the most common ones, if you really look at some of these interviews and hear it, they're going to say terminology almost every single time. That is the biggest hurdle when it comes to bringing in new players. And that only gets worse when it's a different scheme. And that's why scheme fit is something that gets brought up quite a bit. Well, I do think it's something that is very important, obviously, as I'm making this argument. I think you can get around that as long as you're patient and you kind of work with a player. But I do think that is one of the biggest things when you're building a defense kind of from scratch, which in a decent amount of ways you are. Sorry, my dog just decided to pop in for the interview here. In a lot of ways, you really do want to have your guys when you're setting a foundation on the defensive side of the football. You know what I mean? Just so you can get that terminology into those guys. Some of those guys already kind of have an idea of what that terminology sounds like in a 4-3 type defense. Obviously we've had the Colt guys come in, and the claim that we ended up getting was another Colt guy, and that's what ended up getting Terrell Lewis out of here. We had Al-Quadi Muhammad, which obviously that didn't pan out at all, but it's a situation where you have that guy integrated with the locker room, being able to talk with other players who had played in other schemes, or new guys coming into the league, and kind of just trying to get the terminology around the entire locker room and get that kind of going with the team. Obviously the coaches can try to drill that into you, but honestly, and at least this is my experience from playing, in high school, you learn a lot from your teammates as well. They're able to kind of break it down and make it a little bit easier in a way to kind of make it a little bit more easily digestible. So like on the defensive side of the football, like that's my opinion on that. I think once he has his foundation set, whether that's Eberflus, Allen Williams, or whoever our defense coordinator is next year, I think we're going to see more guys. We're going to see us take a little bit more chances on guys that, okay, maybe this guy was a 3-4 outside linebacker, and now we want him to be a 4-3 defensive end. All right, we have enough guys in the building that will be able to educate him on exactly what we do here. And I think even when you look at a guy like Vic Fangio, I think he runs very similarly. He has his guys in there. He brings his guys in. Aaron Lynch in his first year as defense coordinator, I think is a great example of somebody he brought in that kind of just helped everybody kind of learn, hey, this is what Vic's defense is all about. And hopefully that's the way that's going. And hopefully once we have a foundation set on defense, which I think we're building quickly with some of the guys that we've brought in, and some of the performances we saw last year, but hopefully that's the direction we're moving in.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think dude, you got to be optimistic at this point, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like last year didn't happen or anything, but you have to be somewhat optimistic. There's a lot of talent that came in. This season really, as much as people don't want to, I think people have kind of come around to it, even though I said it last year and everyone was like, go fuck yourself. I mean, this is a make or break season for Justin Fields. They're clearly evaluating like, hey, is this, I mean, Ryan Poles even got asked recently about an extension, right? Like if he had any talks of extension, he's due for one after this year. But he was like, we're not fucking talking about that until Justin figures out what he's got to figure out, right? So I truly think this is a make or break year where if shit goes south, and I mean they scored points, right? They scored points last year, and the defense should be better. So I don't see them being like in scratching range for a top quarterback next year, but I do see them evaluating other options, right? Fuck, dude. Maybe they see Bajan as their Brock Purdy. Like, hey, like we think if we develop this kid, like he's our backup plan. I don't know, right? I have no idea, but it does say something that Luke Getsy was a Senior Bowl coach the whole time, worked with him, and they picked him up right away, right? And they felt because Nathan Peterman's there, and I think Nathan Peterman is actually going to be the backup when it comes down to it. Like they're going to let him get the game reps if Fields goes down. But I think they thought he was good enough and showed enough in the preseason where they weren't going to be able to get him on the practice squad. And I think there's a higher value to him, right? Like there's a reason why he was announced on that first 53. There wasn't any, which shout out to Schleg Daddy. I was like, they'd be stupid. Like he's with after what Brock Purdy did last year, how many QB hungry teams there are and how well he played in the preseason. Like, why wouldn't you take a shot on him? You know what I mean? Like if you're a Tampa Bay or one of those types of teams, like fuck, we just saw Dallas pick up Trey Lance and they have Cooper Rush, who they like. And they also have Dak Prescott, who I think Jerry Jones actually hates, but everyone's always looking for a quarterback. So anyone young like that shows promise, that like was kind of a hidden gem, you don't want to let him get out and even have give another team an opportunity to scoop him. So,
well, dude, and that's the thing. Like the way you just explained that, there was like no shot we were going to be able to like release him and even try to sign him back or anything like that, dude. The second that hits the fucking news or that hits the NFL press release, somebody's going to scoop him up immediately. So like I think we even ran the risk of the idea that Bagent was going to be straight up our second string quarterback. Like we were prepared for it because we did not want to lose him to that point.
Yeah.
Honestly, I agree. I do agree with your point as far as Justin Fields go. Like I'm a huge Justin guy. Like I just had a big vote of confidence. I just bought my second jersey of his. Like I'm a huge Justin guy. I have been from the start. I was a Justin Fields guy before a lot of people who are huge Justin Fields guys even knew who the fuck he was. So like I will say this is as make or break of a season as it can get. We need to see this. We need to see the quarterback that we drafted. There's no other way around it. And if we do hit a situation where everything goes fucking wrong here, like Justin throws more interceptions than touchdowns, he can only run, his accuracy looks bad. I'm not saying any of that's going to happen, but I'm saying you have to be prepared for that nightmare scenario, because if you hit a situation where Carolina looked really bad in the preseason and doesn't look like they have an offensive line that's going to be able to protect Bryce Young. Like there's some tough sledding going to be happening there. And if they end up being the worst team in the NFL, we're going to be sitting on that number 1 pick again, or the number 2 pick, or the number 3 pick. When we're in that conversation and Justin Fields has either a middle of the pack, mediocre type season where he doesn't show much more promise than he showed this past year, or he flat out looks bad, you have Caleb Williams staring you in the face.
Well,
like,
and that's
like you can't hold off. And like I've been watching Josh Rosen videos lately. You can't hold off on a potential franchise-changing quarterback with a quarterback who hasn't shown enough for you. It's that simple. And I love Justin. And I think Justin's going to pop off. He's the starting quarterback of my fantasy team. I have an authentic fucking jersey hanging up in my closet of his that I just bought for not cheap. But you have to be realistic in this situation. It's a business at the end of the day. And if Justin doesn't show it, and once again, I want to preface this by saying, not saying I think that'll happen, but if it doesn't happen, you have to be prepared for every scenario. And I think Poles is.
Well, and the reality is him popping off. Like he needs to have that significant year 3 jump that we saw with Hurts, that we saw with Allen, right? Like some of those quarterbacks that
even Lamar.
We need to see that jump, like a large jump. It can't just be an incremental thing, because like you said, you're going to have Caleb Williams staring you in the face. And the best thing possible for the Bears is for him to make that jump, because if the Bears are in a situation again where they know Fields is the guy and they have the number 1 pick, that Caleb Williams number 1 overall is going to go for a fuck ton more than what Bryce Young got you. Like, it's not even going to be comparable. Teams are going to be lined up to give you 3 ones. Like, that's the case, right? And unless something crazy happens, but he already had a decent amount of hype, and then the USC put up like 60 points in the opening primetime game, right? So it's just kind of like one of those things where he's got that kind of hype. He has Andrew Luck level hype. I would say it's bigger than Trevor Lawrence was, to be honest. Like, and Trevor Lawrence was pretty big, but I think his hype right now is insane. It's through the roof.
Well, and then even if you hit a point where say Fields does pop off, I mean, that's best case scenario, obviously. You hit a situation where Carolina's still really bad. Maybe they don't have the number 1 pick. Maybe they have like 2 or 3.
You get Marv.
Marv Harrison's hanging out right there.
If you get the number 2 pick and Fields is your guy, you take fucking Marv. I mean, number 1, here's the thing, right? Like, you can look at Marv at this point. I think that's the best true sophomore season I've ever seen put together in college football. Like,
definitely one of them for sure.
I mean, not in terms of even statistical, because you can fact check me on that. I'm sure there's been a true sophomore that had more stats than him, but in terms of like what he is as a wide receiver, develop wise, I mean, he runs routes like he's a fucking 7-8 year NFL vet. So you have that plus the speed, right? I think he's a better prospect than Jamar Chase was, and Jamar Chase was a pretty goddamn good prospect. So sorry to take his name in vain. But yeah, no, it's just him popping off and us being able to add top tier talent from Carolina. I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but I do think Carolina, I'm happy that the Falcons and the Saints did as much as they did in the offseason, because I do think, like before, I was like, Carolina could possibly make a push in a shitty division, but now I think it's going to take like 10 wins to win that division. So, and I don't think Carolina will get there. Now it depends on how they're going to do. Hopefully they don't hit a stride and like go through a 4 or 5 game win streak, but
I genuinely just don't trust their defense fully. I don't think they have a good rounded defense, and their offensive line almost got Bryce Young killed in the preseason already. That's
weird though, because they had a pretty damn good offensive line, and I felt like they didn't lose much from it.
And I'd even talked to our one of our listeners on Twitter about it.
They were going through a system change too.
Yeah, I agree that they really didn't lose much, but like watching them in the preseason, it was like, holy shit, dude, Bryce is running for his life. Bryce is getting hit. Bryce got hit quite a bit in the preseason. Like, that's just not promising for the amount of fucking capital they just gave up to go get him. And like, I hope nothing but the best for Bryce Young. I want Carolina to be bad this year for obvious reasons, but like, they genuinely did not look good in the preseason. And I just don't think it's going to be a 1-year turnaround for them. I mean, they kind of went the route of like trying to, I don't know if they're trying to sell tickets or what they're trying to do, but I mean, they went out and signed Miles Sanders and Adam Thielen. Sanders, I understand a little bit more than Thielen. Thielen feels like he's on the back end. I don't know, man. The Carolina really, their offseason was interesting, I guess would be the best way to put it, but it just has not looked great in the preseason. Obviously, that's preseason, but like, even to your point, I think the Falcons are going to be a surprise team. Maybe they don't make the playoffs, but I think they're going to be a tough out. And, the Saints, they have weapons. Olave, they have, Michael Thomas, if we want to go there, whatever he is at this point in his career.
Well, and I think Derek Carr is going to bring them better results than they were getting in the last couple of years of quarterback play. So he's a lot more stable, that he can just get those weapons. I mean, I don't love Derek Carr, don't get me wrong, but he's a better quarterback than, I hate to say it, he's a better quarterback than Jameis Winston.
Well, and and this is something that's very, very, very under talked about, and it's understandable considering he's a defensive coach, but Dennis Allen's the guy who brought Derek Carr into the league. So, I mean, that I do think that played a big part in him choosing New Orleans. And, New Orleans does have – what's that?
Just some familiarity. Yeah, no, that's – yeah, no, I get that. I get that aspect of things. I just think also a system change, man. Like, they're going to Frank Reich Frank. I mean, they were pretty much like a power eye fucking single back team last year that just ran the shit out of the rock. So it's a lot easier for an offensive lineman to just be like, hey, we're running the shit out of the rock and hitting play action, right? So them being in a different system could make their offensive line similar to when we turned over from 2017 to 2018 to 2019. It was like, oh, we had a pretty good fucking offense. Like Leno, Massey, we had a pretty good fucking offensive line. Like they were seen as pretty good. And then as soon as we kind of really fully implemented 202 of Matt Nagy's offense, it fell apart for them, right? Like they were not able to handle the responsibility. So that definitely does, they did look like shit in the preseason. I understand kind of why they grabbed a guy like Thielen. It's like, hey, we gave away our best weapon and have a young kid. Let's try to get him someone with some NFL experience that can catch passes. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see. I hope they're dog shit. I hope it puts us in line because for a fact if the Colts are dog shit, which I'm pretty positive they're going to be, if they have the third pick, second pick, doesn't matter. They're going to take Marvin Harrison Jr. Their dad had a Hall of Fame career for him, so there's no way they're going to pass on him.
Yeah, I mean, and that would be the most Jim Irsay move in the world. It just would make too much sense. This guy who hired Jeff Saturday, who isn't even on the freaking coaching staff, to be his interim head coach. So yes, you're 100% right on that. Yeah, no, dude, I'm just excited for football, man. Genuinely. I'm just really excited for football season. We got college football tonight. We got NFL football next Thursday. Now, fucking Detroit playing Kansas City is a choice, but I mean, I'll take it, man.
Detroit's gonna have a fucking good team this year.
Yeah, no, I think so too, and I like Dan Campbell a lot. I'm a huge Dan Campbell guy, but I need to see it. You know what I mean?
You gotta see with their defense, but their offense is gonna fucking score points.
Yeah, well, dude, and I think Goff's gonna have a better year than originally expected. But I think we're kind of going a little bit off.
Let's at least do a season prediction here before we close.
I say we will go. I think we'll win at least 8 games. I think we'll be hovering right around that wild card area. And honestly, with the NFC North where it's at, I think winning 9 games has you right there at the top, near the top of the division. Because I don't think Minnesota is going to do much. I think they're in a situation where they're going to almost I want to rephrase that. They're in a situation where they don't know if Kirk Cousins is going to be their quarterback next year. And Kirk, I don't think is really going to do much to really change outside of just doing exactly what he's done his whole career, which, take that as you will. But I don't think outside of them being able to score points, that they're going to be really anything all that special. And the Packers, who obviously we're going to meet week 1, we're going to learn a lot about them. They have problems. Like I don't want to sit here and jinx us because we play them next week. So I'm not going to point out the quarterback who wished us a happy Father's Day, but they've got they've got problems outside of that, and they've got problems in the point where their GM might lose their job if this falls apart this season because he's the one who built this team the way he did, and I don't know if he gets another shot to go do it, especially with him drafting a quarterback with who was already quarterback under center. So, yeah, I think they win at least 8 games. 10 games takes the division. I don't even think you have to win 10 to do it.
Yeah. I'd like to think that Detroit's going to win more than 10 games, but it's going to be hard to believe that just with their history, right? And they were the hottest team at the end of the year last year, but they were awful at the start of the year. So we don't know how they're going to get off to a start. So I can't say that 10 win. I think that 10 wins might put us in first place in the division. No joke. That being said, I think we're kind of in a range wise. I think we're a 6 to 9 win team. My personal belief is 7 wins. So I was going to say that. So I'm glad I wasn't thinking 8. I just think we're still kind of far away. Like, I think we're going to see some of the issues in terms of our receiving core really isn't as deep as we think it is, right? Like, I like Mooney and Moore a lot, but if one of them gets hurt, I'm not going to disregard Claypool, but if one of them gets hurt, it looks a lot different, right? So
it looks fairly similar to what it looked like last year.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's why it's like I'm a little hesitant to say like I don't get me wrong, they added a ton of fucking talent, but like Tremaine Edmonds' limited snaps in preseason, he looked like dog shit. Like, I didn't hear anyone talk about shedding blocks or anything like that. You know what I mean? Like, I hope, and don't get me wrong, he's still young and like he was very young when he was drafted and in a new system, all that first preseason action. I'm not going to overreact, but like, I hope he kind of hits somewhat of his potential of when he was first drafted, right? Because he never hit it in Buffalo, and he's truly gotten into like his what would be considered a veteran in terms of age. I think he's a good player, but it's just watching that, it was like, dude, it's hard to believe that him and Roquan are in the same conversation, right? So it's like, I still think that defense is going to be a much bigger issue than we anticipated. I think the run defense will be a little bit better, right? And hopefully that helps in the passing game, but I can't fully buy into the hype. I need to see it on the field first. We also need to see Flus like put it together, right? Like there were times there last year where you're looking at game management. And it's like you lose a lot of those 1-score games. Some of those come down to coaching as well, right? Like decisions being made and how you're utilizing the clock, all that shit. So I think there's just so much that needs to be proven. Same thing with Getsy, right? Like consistently calling games that are going to put points up easily and not force your quarterback to run in fucking circles. So then by the time you get to the final weeks of the season, it looks like he can't even run anymore, right? Like he looked just so dead and almost like the effort wasn't there in that last Lions game, right? So it's just there's a lot that needs to be proven. I think if they come out and they're clicking on all cylinders, like that's another thing too. We didn't see the continuity of the offensive line. Most of it, it's great that pretty much everyone's healthy except for Tevin Jenkins, right? But we didn't see that continuity. Like you need to have those practices together. A lot of those guys missed. Claypool missed most of fucking training camp. Nate Davis missed most of training camp. Tevin Jenkins was in and out, right? And he was battling. But other than even Darnell Wright missed some time in training camp. And he's not someone that I don't think he missed one game in college. So, as a former offensive lineman, continuity is such a big factor, right? And like having 4 rotating pieces that didn't start in the preseason together or 5, it's not something that like we should expect should be gelling right away. So I think that would kind of cause them to get off to a slower start. I don't want to be doom and gloom about the Packers game, but like they didn't look ready to fucking play in their last preseason game. Like they didn't look good at all. Offensively, defensively, they looked a little bit better, but I know it's the Bills, but fuck, man, like that, our offense looked fucking horrible that last preseason game. It was bad.
Yeah, no, I don't know. Time will tell, because I think why I just have a hard time putting stock in preseason though, because
it's
even
tough. They're not
even
trying to show anything.
Even the 2018 preseason was not great. Especially in the last game with Mitch taking on Mahomes. Our offense didn't really pop off there. Then, week 1, whole thing came together very well. So, I mean, we all know how it ended, but those first 3.5 quarters are pretty cool, weren't they? But I'm a little I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bullish heading into this Packers game. We're going to talk about it next week. We're going to talk about cooking a lot of cheese because we didn't really touch on it in this episode for that exact reason. But yeah, I don't know, man. I think gelling is going to be important, but I think it'll happen a little bit faster than we think. And as long as guys stay healthy, that's really going to be the key. And if Chase Claypool, please, for the love of God, prove me and Lucas wrong at this point, and just, dude, have quietly a really good year. You know what I mean?
So insane, yeah. Please.
Like, dude, if you give me 800 yards and like 6-7 touchdowns, that's incredible. I'm so happy with that. Plus, you might have even not priced yourself out. I don't know. We'll see how it all works out. But like, if Claypool has even a semi-productive year, like I think our offense can really be in business because we already, Fields already has the chemistry with Mooney and Kmet. DJ Moore, hell, dude, with the
seems
talent
like they kicked it off pretty well, yeah.
Yeah, with the talent he is, it's just only a matter of freaking time. And you look at how many quarterbacks he had to deal with in Carolina, and he still popped off. So, like,
it's nice to see what he could do after the catch, dude. He really, that's someone that if you just get him the ball, he's going to make things happen, which is great. Fields needs that so bad. So, I'm sure the chemistry is pretty much there for them. It sounds like they were butt buddies all of training camp and off season.
Well, and even that threat of him moving in motion as the ball is being snapped, kind of like in that almost like that Deebo Samuel type role where you have to watch DJ Moore. You have to. You do not have a choice. You know what I mean? That's going to be really nice. And if Fields has a day where he hits on a good run or two, they're going to have to pay attention to Justin and DJ Moore right up the side of the field for 30 yards. If Eknemary St. Brown can do it, TJ Moore certainly can.
Yeah, 100%. Exactly.
But I think that's pretty good place for us to stop. Obviously, we're going to be covering the Packer game next week. We're going to be going weekly. We're going to start jumping right into it. It's football season, baby. We're fucking back. But that's all we have this week for the Barely There podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere else you get your podcasts. Follow both of us on Twitter at that pod guy Duke for me and at Lucas Perfetti 46 for him, as well as the podcast at Barely There Pod. Till next time, this has been Duke Coughlin, joined by Lucas Perfetti. We'll be back next week for another exciting episode covering your Chicago Bears. Drink your Eberfuel and say your prayers. Bear down.
Bear down.